You are watching him from across the dinner table. He's laughing, loudly, at something that stopped being funny 5 minutes ago. There's a joke he wants everyone to hear again, the same one from last Thanksgiving, and he tells it with the confidence of someone who has never once questioned whether the room is still with him. And here's the thing, he's not a bad person. You know that. You've known him for years, maybe your whole life. But there's something underneath all the noise, something oddly hollow that you can't quite name. Something that makes the room feel smaller when he walks in. Something that makes real conversations disappear like smoke the moment they start. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you live with someone like this. Maybe in the quietest corner of your own mind, you've wondered if parts of you are becoming this. And that question, that uncomfortable, honest question, is exactly why this video exists, because the man-child isn't just a punchline. He isn't just a lazy roommate or an exhausting brother-in-law or a boyfriend who forgets everything that matters. The man-child is a psychological portrait. And once you understand the architecture beneath the behavior, you will never look at it the same way again. Let's start somewhere most people never think to look: childhood. Not in the obvious way, not abuse, not trauma in the dramatic sense, but in the subtle, invisible way that shapes everything without anyone ever noticing. Think about what it feels like to grow up in a home where emotional difficulty is quietly removed before it can teach you anything. Where disappointment is immediately replaced. Where frustration is solved for you before you ever have to sit with it. Where the adults around you love you so completely and yet so anxiously that they cannot tolerate watching you struggle for even a moment. This is called buffering, and it is done with the best intentions in the world. But here's what buffering actually creates. A person who reaches adulthood having never built the internal architecture for tolerating discomfort. No psychological muscles for sitting with failure. No emotional fluency for navigating complexity. Just a vast, unexamined hunger to return to the world where everything was soft and the rules bent in their favor. And the adult body of a man-child is just a boy who was loved in a way that accidentally taught him that the world exists to absorb him, not the other way around. Now here is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Because from the outside, the man-child often looks like someone who doesn't care about anything deeply. He shrugs too easily. He moves on too fast. He cracks jokes in moments that call for stillness. He deflects sincerity with humor. He dismisses vulnerability with a smirk, and you would think this is someone with no interior life. Nothing underneath, but the opposite is almost always true. Underneath the humor, there is an enormous, aching sensitivity that was never given a safe place to land. Underneath the avoidance, there is a deep terror, not of responsibility exactly, but of being seen trying and failing. Because trying and failing was never normalized. It was always quietly rescued away, which means now, as an adult, trying feels like exposure, like walking out onto a stage with no rehearsal and no script, so instead he doesn't try. Or he tries just enough to say he tried, and then retreats before the outcome can hurt him. Or he turns everything into a performance, loud, entertaining, impossible to pin down, because as long as he's the one making you laugh, he controls the story. That's not laziness. That's a very specific, very sophisticated form of self-protection. There's something else worth naming here, and it tends to make people deeply uncomfortable when they first hear it. The man-child is often rewarded, not consciously, not intentionally, but in the relational ecosystem around him, his behavior has almost always been met with something that functions like a reward. A mother who still does his laundry at 32, not because she thinks it's healthy, but because the discomfort of watching him fail is more painful to her than the inconvenience of doing it herself. A partner who quietly absorbs the emotional labor of two people because asking him to carry his share creates conflict, and conflict is exhausting, and it's easier to just handle it. Systems develop around the man-child that make change almost unnecessary for him. And that's not purely his fault. It's the architecture of every relationship around him, bending quietly under the weight of one person's unresolved growth. But here's the thing about that architecture. It is invisible to him. He doesn't see what he costs people. He doesn't see the weariness behind the patience. Not because he's cruel, but because he was never taught to look. He was never taught that other people's inner worlds carry the same weight and reality as his own. That is the definition of something called developmental egocentrism, a psychological state that most of us move through during adolescence and then grow out of as we learn through friction and accountability that we are not the center of the story. But if that friction is removed, that growth stalls, and a person can remain emotionally, relationally 19 years old inside a body that is 38. Here is where it becomes genuinely hard to hold, because this portrait, the avoidance, the deflection, the arrested development, is not comfortable to see clearly. Not when you care about someone who carries it. Not when you recognize that the little boy still waiting to be shown how to be a man is somewhere inside the person who keeps letting you down. And maybe, somewhere deeper, this lands differently for you personally. Maybe you are sitting with the recognition that you have developed certain habits that look a little like this. The way you avoid certain conversations, the way you delegate certain emotional responsibilities, the way you keep the serious things at arm's length with humor or distraction, the way some part of you wants to be taken care of more than you want to do the taking care. That recognition isn't a verdict, it's an invitation. Because the difference between a man-child and a man who is simply still growing is not some fixed personality trait. It is awareness. The moment you can look at a pattern inside yourself, actually see it, not defend it, not rationalize it, not laugh it off, you have already crossed a threshold that the true man-child cannot. The man-child doesn't know he's running. He genuinely believes the world around him is just inconveniently demanding. If you can see the running, that is not a small thing. That is everything. Growth for someone carrying these patterns rarely looks like a dramatic transformation. It doesn't look like a single conversation that cracks something open and rearranges everything. It looks like something much smaller and much harder. Choosing to sit with discomfort one more second than you normally would. Having the conversation you have been putting off for 6 months. Letting yourself try something in front of someone else and letting it be imperfect. It looks like gradually, quietly, building the internal architecture that was never built the first time around. That is painful. Not in a dramatic way. In the slow, private, deeply unglamorous way that real growth almost always is. But here's what waits on the other side of that pain. Something the man-child has never been able to access. Depth. Real intimacy. The experience of being fully known by someone who loves you not because you were charming enough or funny enough, but because you were honest enough, vulnerable enough, present enough. That is a quality of life that no amount of avoidance or deflection can create. No level of charm can substitute for it. And deep down, deeper than even the man-child himself can articulate, that is what he is hungry for. That is what all of this is circling, not immaturity for its own sake, but a desperate, misdirected search for the safety to finally just be, without performing, without deflecting, without disappearing behind a joke at the exact moment something real could have happened. If you know someone carrying this, love them patiently, but don't absorb what they won't hold themselves. Compassion is not the same as endless accommodation, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop making it easy for them not to grow. And if some part of this script landed somewhere personal, if something here pressed on something tender, that discomfort is not a sign of weakness. It is the exact opposite. It is the beginning of something that the man-child, in all his noise and avoidance, has not yet found the courage to begin. You did, and that matters more than you know. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And stay with us. Because this channel exists for the people who are willing to look honestly at what's happening inside. That kind of courage deserves to be met.